She was singing when the water ran out. Not crying, not praying the way the church women prayed, loud enough for God and the neighbors both. Just singing, low, steady, a song with no words I knew, standing over a well that had gone to dust while every other soul in that valley was cursing the sky. I'd buried a wife. I'd buried the sound of my own music with her. I had spent 4 years counting fence posts under my breath so I wouldn't have to feel anything at all. And then a woman the whole town wanted gone stood in the worst season of my life and made a sound so full of stubborn hope that I forgot, for 1 whole minute, to be a coward. This is the story of the hardest year I ever lived, and the voice that carried me through it. It's the story of a song I was too broken to sing, and the woman who sang it anyway, through drought, through hate, through a choice that near tore both of us in half. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll understand why an old rancher who swore he was done with everything soft finally learned the difference between surviving a life and living one. Her name, the way her people said it, meant first light, and she brought it back to a man who'd been living in the dark so long he'd stopped believing in morning. The bucket came up empty for the 9th time, and I counted it, because counting was the only thing that kept my hands from shaking. 9. I remember the number the way you remember the last ordinary thing before your life turns. 9 pulls on a rope. 9 times the wooden bucket knocked hollow against the sides of the well and came back dry as a bone. And on the 9th I sat down in the dirt beside the stone rim and put my face in my hands and did not pray, because I'd given that up around the same time I gave up singing. That was the summer the verd ran low, and the sky forgot how to make weather. Arizona Territory, 1886, and the drought had its teeth in everything. My cattle were ribs walking around under hide. My grass was the color of an old man's beard. I had 40 acres of good bottomland gone to powder and a mortgage in town held by a man who smiled when he told you bad news. And every morning I woke up and did the arithmetic of my ruin before I'd even got my boots on. That's the truth of me at the start of this. I was a man made mostly of subtraction. My name is Elias Ward. Folks called me Eli when they liked me and Ward when they wanted money, and by that summer most everybody wanted money. I was 39 and felt 60. I'd come to that valley 11 years before with a wife named Cora and a wagon full of hope, and I'd lost the first one to a fever 4 years gone and traded the second one away a little at a time until there wasn't any left. Cora used to say I had music in me. She'd say it like it was a fact about the weather, sure as sunrise. I had a harmonica she gave me our first Christmas, a little brass thing worn smooth on the ends, and I used to play it evenings on the porch while she hummed, and after she died I put it in the bottom of a trunk under a horse blanket and I did not take it out. Some men drink, some men wander. I stopped making sound. That was my grieving. Silence and counting, because if I was counting fence posts or nail heads or the number of times a windmill turned, I couldn't be thinking about her. So there I was on the 9th empty bucket, and that's when I heard it. At first I thought it was the wind doing something clever in the rocks. It came from the low draw southeast of my place, past the broken fence line where my land gave up and turned into a stretch of nobody's country, mesquite and cholla, and a dry creek that hadn't seen a real flow since spring. A sound rising and falling patient with a shape to it. Not a coyote, not the wind, a voice. I got up and I walked toward it, and I'll tell you honestly I don't know why. A smarter man would have minded his own catastrophe. But I was so hollowed out by then that anything with a shape to it pulled me like a current, and this had more shape than I'd heard in years. She was standing at the old Delgado well. That well was a piece of history nobody claimed anymore. A Mexican family had dug it 2 generations back, before the Anglos came, before the army, before any of us, and the family was long gone and the adobe of their house had melted back into the ground it came from, and all that was left was a ring of fieldstone around a hole in the earth. Everyone knew that well was dry. It had been dry for years, and she was standing over it with a rope in her hands and a cottonwood bucket, and she was singing. She was an Apache woman. I want to say that plain, right at the front, because the way this story went for a lot of people in that town hung entirely on those 3 words, and I need you to understand that I saw them too, first thing, the way you can't help but see the weather. She wore a long calico skirt gone gray with dust and a man's shirt too big for her cinched at the waist, and her hair was black going a little silver at the temples, tied back with a strip of red cloth. She was maybe my age, maybe a little younger. The sun ages everyone out here, and it's hard to say. And she was singing over that dead well like it might answer her. I stood there like a fence post, counting my own heartbeats without meaning to. She saw me, Of course she saw me. I'm not a quiet man across open ground. She stopped singing. And in the silence that dropped down between us, I felt the loss of that sound so sharp it startled me, like she'd taken something out of the air that I'd only just noticed I needed. "That well's dry," I said, stupid. The first thing I say to her in 11 years of stories that would come after, and it's a fact she plainly already knew. She looked at me a while. Her eyes were steady in a way that wasn't hostile and wasn't friendly, just took my measure the way you'd size up whether coming over a ridge. Then she said in English clear as creek water, "Everything's dry, doesn't mean you stop asking." And she turned back to the well and dropped the bucket in. I should have gone home. I had my own dry well and my own dying cattle and a stack of subtraction waiting for me on the kitchen table. But I didn't. I stood there and I watched her pull that bucket up empty, and I watched her not be surprised, and I watched her lower it again with the same patience, and something about the whole thing was so far past reasonable that I couldn't look away from it. It was like watching someone knock on a grave. On the third pull, the bucket came up with maybe 2 inches of water in the bottom. Muddy, half sand, but water. She looked at it a long moment. Then she looked at me, and I swear this is true, she almost smiled. Not at me, at the water, at the well, at the whole ridiculous stubborn business of asking a dead thing for a living answer and getting one. "See," she said. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Cora, and I listened to the house tick and settle, and I thought about a woman singing over a dry well, and I thought about the harmonica in the bottom of the trunk. And for the first time in 4 years, the two thoughts wanted to be in the same room together, and I couldn't figure why that scared me so bad. Her name was Shaw, or near enough. The real shape of it in her own tongue had a catch in the middle my mouth couldn't manage, and she was patient about it, but not so patient she'd let me maul it. So after a few tries, she said, "Shaw is close. It means first light. When the dark's still there, but the color's coming." She said the town called her Sarah, at the mission, when they still let her come to the mission, and she said the word Sarah the way you'd hold a coat that belonged to somebody else. I learned this over the next weeks in pieces, because she was on that nobody's country between my land and the dead Delgado place more days than not, and I found reasons to be near the broken fence line. I told myself the reasons were about the fence. The fence did need mending. I mended it slower than any fence in the history of the territory. She was living in Alinta. She'd built herself against the tumbled adobe, brush and canvas, and a wall of stacked stone, tucked into the draw where the wind couldn't get at it. She had a fire circle and a black kettle and a rifle that had seen a lot of country, and she had a boy. The boy was maybe 7, thin as a rail, dark-eyed, watchful in the way of a child who's learned that being watchful keeps you alive. His name was Cha, and he was not her son. That took me a while to understand. He was her sister's boy, and her sister was dead, and the how of that death was one of those things I learned not to ask about because Shaw's whole face would go still and closed as a shut door when it came near. What I pieced together, over that summer and the harder autumn after, was this. Her people, a band that had run with the ones the army was hunting that very season, Geronimo's people, though Shaw's kin had split off before the end, had been broken and scattered and shipped east on the trains, and Shaw had gotten out with the boy in the confusion, and now the two of them were living in a fold of ground between a dead man's well and a broken man's fence. Because there was no place in the whole wide territory that wanted them, and this was the one place nobody had gotten around to running them off of yet. She sang all the time. That's the thing I need you to understand about her, the thing the title of this whole story turns on. Shaw sang through every hard day, and every day was a hard day, and she sang anyway. Not because she was happy. God knows she had no cause for happy. She sang the way other people breathe because stopping was worse. She had a song for hauling water and a song for grinding mesquite pods and a song, low and almost too quiet to hear, that she'd sing to Cha at night when she thought the dark had swallowed them up and nobody was listening. I listened. I'm not proud of the listening, but I did it, lying up in the mesquite above the draw where I had no business being, listening to a woman sing an orphan boy to sleep, and I'd feel the harmonica in my mind like a stone in a shoe. One evening she caught me at it. I'd gotten careless. She came up the draw quiet as smoke, and there I was, sitting in the brush like a fool, and she stood below me with her arms crossed and said, "You could just come down. It's cheaper on your knees." My face went hot as a branding iron. I was mending fence. "In the dark uphill from your fence," she let that sit, Then, and this surprised me, you like the singing. I didn't have anything. The honest answer was so big and so tangled that no words would carry it, so I said the smallest true thing I could find. My wife used to hum, she's gone. Shaw didn't say she was sorry. Out here the sorry sayers were mostly the ones who'd never lost anything, and she'd lost more than a valley full of them put together, and she knew that sorry was a thin blanket for a cold this deep. She just looked at me a while, and then she said, "Come down and sit by the fire, Eli Ward. My knees hurt watching you." So I came down, and that was the first night I sat at her fire, and I did not sing, and she did not ask me to, and Cha watched me the whole time like I was a coyote that had wandered too close, and it was the least alone I'd felt since Cora died. The town's name was Camp Verde, and the town had opinions. I want to be fair to them even now, even after everything. They were frightened people in a frightening time. That summer the papers were full of Geronimo, of raids real and imagined, of blood in the border country, and every rancher who'd lost stock to the drought found it easier to blame an Apache than a dry sky. Fear does that. It looks for a face. And there was a face, tucked in a draw 2 miles out of town. A woman and a boy who were exactly the shape of everything they were afraid of. It started small. It always starts small. A word at the mercantile. Old Prout who ran the feed store asking me, real casual, if I knew there was an Apache squatting out past my line, and did I know the army paid for information. I said I didn't know what he meant. He looked at me like he knew I was lying, which I was. Then it got less small. There was a man named Del Harmon who ran cattle north of me and had lost more than most that summer. And Del had a way of getting loud in the saloon and louder still with 3 drinks in him. And Del decided that the drought and the dying cattle and the whole rotten hand the territory had dealt him could be laid at the feet of one woman and one boy living in a draw. I heard about it secondhand at first. Then I heard about it firsthand, the day Del and 2 other men rode out to my place and sat their horses in my yard and told me they'd be handling the Apache problem on my south line, and did I have any objection? I want to tell you I stood tall right then. I want to tell you the man I'd become by the end of this story was the man standing in that yard. But the truth is uglier, and it's the truth, so I'll give it to you. I stood on my porch and I felt every ounce of my own cowardice, all 4 years of counting instead of feeling, all the ways I'd made myself small so nothing could get at me again. And I said, "Do what you want. It's not my land she's on." Del grinned, "Knew you were a sensible man, Ward." They rode off south, and I stood on my porch and I counted the fence posts along my drive. There were 41, and I got to 41, and there was nothing left to count, and the feeling I'd been holding off came down on me all at once like a barn roof. It's not my land she's on. I'd said that, about a woman who'd pulled water from a dead well, about a boy who watched me like a coyote because the world had taught him to. I'd said the small, cowardly thing, and 3 drunk men were riding toward the one fire I'd sat at in 4 years, and I was standing on my porch counting fence posts. I don't remember deciding to move. I remember I was on my porch, and then I was on my horse, and the horse was running, and the country was going by in a blur of gray brush and browner ground, and I was cutting crosslots to beat them to the draw because they'd taken the wagon road and I hadn't, and the whole way there I wasn't counting anything. That's how I knew something in me had changed, or was changing, right then in the running. For the first time in 4 years, my head was silent of numbers and full of one thing only, which was a woman's face, and it wasn't Cora's. I beat them by maybe 10 minutes. Shaw was at the fire. She stood when she heard my horse, hand going to that old rifle, and when she saw it was me, her face did a thing I hadn't seen it do. It opened, just a crack, before she got it shut again. Cha was behind her, already moving toward the shadow of the adobe the way he'd plainly been taught. "Men are coming," I said off the horse before it stopped. 3 of them, Harmon and 2 more. They mean to run you off, or worse, I don't know which. You've got to." "Got to what?" Her voice was flat and hard as a skillet. "Run, to where Eli Ward, tell me the direction, I'll go that way." She swept her arm at the whole dead valley, the drought, the sky. "You know a place that wants us, name it." And I didn't have one, she was right. There wasn't a direction on the whole compass that led anywhere but worse. So I did the second thing I'm not proud of, except that this one I am proud of in the end, because it cost me everything easy and gave me back everything that mattered. I said, "Then don't run, come to my place." She stared at me. "They won't touch you under my roof," I said, And even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true, and she knew I wasn't sure, and she came anyway. That's the measure of how bad her choices were, that a maybe from a coward was better than any certainty she had left. She grabbed the boy and a bundle and the rifle, and we went, the three of us and one tired horse, back across the dark lots to my place. And we were inside with the door barred and the lamp out when I heard the riders come down the wagon road and find the fire cold and the draw empty. We sat in the dark of my kitchen, the three of us, and did not make a sound. Cha was pressed against Shah's side. Shah held the rifle across her knees. And me, I sat there in the dark of the house I'd shared with a dead woman, harboring a living one, and I understood that I had just crossed a line I could never walk back over, and that everything in my life from that night forward was going to be harder and truer than everything before it. Out in the yard, I heard Del Harmon's horse. I heard him call my name once, twice. I did not answer. After a while he cursed and the horses moved off and the night went quiet, and in the quiet, soft, so soft I felt it more than heard it, Shah began under her breath to sing. It was the song she sang to Cha, the one for the dark. And the boy's breathing evened out against her, and my own chest loosened a knot it had been holding for 4 years. And in the dark of my kitchen, without deciding to, without hardly knowing I was doing it, I reached up and I hummed one low note along with her. Just one, it came out cracked and rusty as an old hinge. Shah stopped. In the dark I couldn't see her face. Then she picked the song back up right where she'd left it, and she left a space in it, a space shaped like a second voice. I didn't fill it, not that night. I wasn't ready that night. But she'd left the space, and a man can live a long time on the knowledge that somebody left a space for him. They came back with the law. Not real law, there wasn't much of that within a day's ride, but the shape of it, which out here was often enough. Del Harmon rode into my yard 4 days later with a deputy marshal named Coates, a soft, heavy man with a tin star, and an eye for the easy side of any argument, and Del did the talking while Coates sat his horse and looked bored and dangerous both at once. "Ward's harboring hostiles," Del said loud for the benefit of the 2 other men he'd brought. "That Apache and her whelp, government's got a policy, they all go east. This ain't personal, Coates, it's federal." I'd had 4 days to become a different man than the one who'd said it's not my land she's on, and I found out in that yard whether the change had taken. It had taken. "She's not a hostile," I said. "She's a widow and an orphan boy living on nobody's land, and the only harm they've done anybody is exist where you can see them. You want to arrest somebody, Coates? You can arrest me, because I'm the one who moved them onto my property, and last I checked a man's allowed to say who sleeps under his own roof." I said it steady. I want that on the record. My hands were shaking behind my back where they couldn't see, and I counted my own words as they came out, 13. In that longest sentence, I remember counting them. But my voice was steady, and steadiness is the only currency that spends in a standoff. Coates looked at me a long time. Then he looked at Del. Then he did the arithmetic that soft, dangerous men always do, which was, how much trouble is this worth to me personally? And a rancher standing on his own porch claiming his own rights was, it turned out, more trouble than Coates was paid for. "Policies on the reservations and the trains," Coates said at last, to Del, not to me. "Not on a man's private property. You got a complaint, take it to the Indian agent in Prescott." He reined his horse around. "I rode out here for nothing, Harmon. Don't do that to me twice." Del's face went the color of a brick. But he went. They all went. And I stood on my porch and watched the dust of them settle, and I felt about 10 feet tall for exactly as long as it took me to understand what I'd just done, which was make an enemy of every frightened man in the valley, permanent, with my name attached. Shah had heard all of it from inside. When I came in, she was standing at the window with the rifle down at her side, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, and she said, "Why?" "Why what?" "Why any of it?" She wasn't grateful. I understood later she couldn't afford to be grateful. Gratitude is a debt, and she'd been made to pay too many debts to people who'd only helped her so they could own a piece of her. She was suspicious. She'd have been a fool not to be. Men don't stand up in front of a marshal for nothing, Eli Ward, not for people like us. So, why? What do you want? And I stood there in my own kitchen, and I understood she was asking me the realest question anybody had asked me in 4 years, and that a lie would end everything and she'd know it for a lie besides. So I told her the truth, which I hadn't even told myself yet. "You brought the sound back," I said. She frowned. I had to work for it. After my wife, I stopped making any sound. I count things so I don't have to feel them. I've been dead about as long as I've been alive these 4 years. And you stood over a dry well and you sang, and my voice went out from under me. I got it back. I don't want anything from you. I want you to be alive across the fence from me. That's the whole of it. I'd stand in front of 100 marshals for the chance to keep hearing that sound in the world. It was the most words I'd said at once in years. When I was done, I felt like I'd run a mile. Shah looked at me, and slowly, the suspicion went out of her face. Not all the way, it never went all the way. She'd earned that suspicion in a school I couldn't imagine, but enough. Enough that when she spoke again, her voice had lost its skillet edge. "That's a strange thing to want," she said. "I'm a strange man. My wife said so." And Shah, for the first time since I'd met her, laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, like she'd startled herself, and she put her hand over her mouth like she meant to catch it and put it back. And Cha looked up from the corner where he'd been whittling a stick with my old knife, astonished, like he'd forgotten his aunt could make that sound. That laugh, I'd have stood in front of 1,000 marshals for that laugh. The drought got worse before it got better, and then it got worse again. We pooled what we had, the three of us, without ever exactly deciding to. My well was near dry, but the Delgado well, that stubborn dead well Shah had woken up with her asking, kept giving 2 and 3 inches of muddy water a day. Enough for the boy and the kettle, if not for cattle. She knew the country in ways I didn't, for all I'd lived there 11 years. She knew which mesquite pods you could grind and which would sicken you, knew where a thread of seep water ran under a rock ledge in the far draw, knew how to make a little food stretch into the shape of a meal. I knew cattle and fences, and the price of everything in town. Between us, we made a life that was more than either of us had alone, and we made it in the worst season of a hard country. And if you'd told me a year before that, I'd find the truest home of my life in a drought, harboring a fugitive, hated by my whole valley, I'd have said you were a fool. Cha came around slow. Children who have been hunted come around slow, and you don't rush them, you just keep being safe until they believe it. I taught him to ride my old mare. I taught him some cowboy foolishness, how to spin a rope, how to whistle through his fingers loud enough to hurt, and he taught me some words in his own tongue, careful words, testing me. And when I got one right, his whole face would light like I'd handed him something. One evening he brought me the stick he'd been whittling all those weeks. He'd made it into a horse. A rough little horse, legs too long, but a horse, unmistakable, and he pushed it into my hands and didn't say anything and ran off before I could. And I sat on my porch and held a wooden horse a hunted boy had carved me, and I cried for the first time since I'd buried Cora. Cried like a spring finally breaking through dry ground. And the singing, every day the singing. I started joining it, slow like the boy coming around, slow and scared. First just humming low when I thought she wouldn't notice, though she always noticed. Then one night at the fire, we'd moved back out to the draw for the evenings, the house too full of a dead woman for the living work of grieving. Shah was singing the water song, and she left one of those spaces in it, the second voice-shaped spaces she'd started leaving me the very first night. And this time, God help me, I went and got the harmonica. I hadn't touched it in 4 years. It was tarnished and one reed stuck and my hands didn't remember what to do. I sat down across the fire from her and I put it to my mouth, and the first note came out so wrong that Cha laughed, a real boy's laugh, delighted at the grown man making a fool of himself, and I laughed too, and Cha waited, patient as she'd been at the dead well, and I tried again. The second note found the space she'd left. I can't explain to you what it did to me, joining that song. Cora's in it somehow. Everyone I'd lost was in it, and everyone Shah had lost, and all of it running together in the firelight like water finally reaching water. She sang and I played, and the boy beat time on a flat rock with 2 sticks, and above us the drought sky was thick with more stars than any wet country ever gets to see. And for 1 hour there was no Marshall, and no Del Harmon, and no mortgage, and no dead wells. There was just 3 people who'd lost everything, making one sound together in the dark, and the sound was the thing itself, the whole reason to keep going, the thing I'd been too broken to make and too broken to live without. When it ended, Shah looked at me across the fire and she said, "There it is." "There's what?" "The thing you buried," she poked the fire. "It wasn't gone, Eli Ward, you just stopped asking it to come up." And she smiled, that almost smile, the one she'd given the water. "Everything's dry doesn't mean you stop asking." Here's where I have to tell you about the hardest thing, because a true story doesn't get to skip the hard parts, and this is the hardest. Her people came back for her. It was late autumn. the drought finally breaking in cold gray rains that turned my ruined grass green for spite. When 3 riders came down out of the hills one dusk, Apache men, gaunt and hard-used. One of them a cousin of Shaw's who'd gotten free of the trains the way she had and had spent the whole terrible year gathering the scattered pieces of their band, finding the free ones, the hidden ones, building something out of wreckage. They'd made a place. Far north, up past the rim, in country too broken for the army to bother with, a hidden fold of the world where what was left of Shah's people were trying to be a people again. And they'd come for her and the boy. Because Cha was the last of a particular line, and blood matters, and a scattered people gathering itself needs every child it has, and because Shah was theirs, and they'd walked half the territory to bring her home. I stood in my yard and watched Shah talk with her cousin in a language I'd only learned 10 words of, and I watched her face, and I knew before she said anything in English what the shape of it was. She came to me after. The riders made camp out by the draw. Cha was with them already, being fussed over by a woman who'd known his mother, and I could hear his voice carrying across the dark, high and happy in a way I'd never once heard it in all our months, and that sound, that was the thing that made the decision for both of us, though it took us till dawn to say it. They have a place, Shah said. We were on my porch. The rain had stopped and the air smelled like the first honest thing in a year. A real place, my people, what's left of them, and the boy, her voice caught. The boy needs his people, Eli. He needs to grow up knowing what he is. Here he's a hunted thing hiding in a white man's house. There he's ours. He's the future. Do you understand what that is to people who almost didn't have one? I understood. That's the terrible part. I understood completely, and understanding is what made it hurt like it did. So you're going, I said. I have to. And there it was. The morally heavy thing, the emotionally impossible thing, laid out plain between us on a porch in the dark. Because here is the truth I have to give you straight. I loved her by then. Not the grabbing kind of love, not the kind that owns. The kind that had grown up slow out of shared water and shared fire and one song sung together in the dark. And she, I believe, I'll go to my grave believing, she loved me too, in whatever way a woman can love who's had every other thing she loved taken from her by men who looked like me. And it did not matter. Or rather, it mattered more than anything, and it still wasn't enough, because Cha's happy voice was carrying across the dark, and there was a place where he could grow up whole, and there was no version of that place that had a white rancher in it. Her people were a healing wound. I was a thing from the world that had wounded them. However good I was, however much we'd made together, I could not follow her into that fold of the hills, and she could not stay in this valley that had already tried once to put her on a train east and would try again. There was no direction on the whole compass that led to both. She'd told me that the first hard night, and it was still true, and it would always be true. Stay till dawn, I said. It was all I had. Just stay till dawn. She stayed till dawn. We didn't sleep. We sat up on the porch through the last night, and we didn't say much, because everything that mattered had already been said, and the rest was just the ache of the hours going by too fast. Near the middle of the night, she started to sing, low. The water song, the one from the dead well, the first one I'd ever heard her sing. And I got the harmonica and I joined her, and we played it soft so as not to wake the camp, and it was the most beautiful and the most broken thing I've ever been part of, that song in the dark on the last night, both of us knowing it was the last night, playing it anyway. Playing it because it was the last night. She taught me that without ever saying it in words. You don't sing because things are good. You sing because stopping is worse. You sing through the hard day precisely because it's hard. That's what the song is for. Toward dawn, she said, I'm going to tell you a thing, and then I don't want to talk about it, because if we talk about it, I won't be able to leave, and I have to be able to leave. All right. You brought the boy back too, she said. Not just yourself. Cha, when we found you, he watched you like a coyote, you remember. And you never rushed him, and you never lied to him, and you taught him to whistle, and you cried over a wooden horse where he could see you do it, and you showed him that a man from that world could be safe. He needed to learn that before he learned to be afraid of all of them forever. You gave him that. He'll carry it. Wherever he goes, however hard it gets for him, and it will get hard, Eli, I'm not a fool, I know what's coming for a boy like him. He'll carry the one white man who is safe. You did that. She wasn't crying. Shah didn't cry where you could see it, same as I'd learned not to till the wooden horse. So don't you ever tell yourself this year was for nothing. It was for him. It was for me. It was for you. It wasn't for nothing. The color came into the sky then. The dark still there, but the color coming. First light, her name. Shah, I said. Don't. I just wanted to say it right, one time. The way your people say it. And I said it, the real shape of it, the catch in the middle and all, which I'd finally learned over all those months, which I'd been practicing in secret the way I'd once buried a harmonica, and I got it right, and it was the only time in the whole story I ever got it exactly right. She put her hand over her mouth, and this time she let herself cry, one time, quiet, into her own hand, watching the light come up over the country that had never once been kind to her. Then she took her hand down, and she was Shah again, whole and hard and unbreakable, the woman who asked dead wells for water and got it. "Play us out," she said. So I did. I stood on my porch and I played the water song while she walked out to the camp in the first light, and I played while they broke the camp and mounted up, and I played while Cha ran back one last time to press something into my hand. The knife, my old knife, the one he'd carved the horse with, giving it back, or giving me a reason to see him again. I've never been sure which, and I've chosen to believe the second one. And I played while they rode north out of the valley and up toward the broken hills. Getting smaller, the boy turning once to lift his hand, Shah not turning at all because she'd told me she couldn't, and she meant it. And I played until they were gone over the rise, and the sound of the harmonica was the only sound left in the whole wide morning. Then I stopped, and the silence came back. But it was a different silence than before. That's the thing I most need you to understand at the end of all this. The silence after was not the silence before. Before, the silence was a grave I'd climbed into and pulled shut over myself. After, the silence was just quiet. The ordinary quiet of a morning with the singing gone out of it for a while. And a quiet you can live in and wait in and hope in, because you know the sound is real and out there in the world, up in a fold of the hills where a people is stitching itself back together. And a woman is singing over their fires, and a boy is learning to be whole, and both of them are alive, and being alive is the whole of what I'd wanted. I'm an old man now, telling you this. The valley's changed. Camp Verde's a proper town with a rail spur and a church with a real bell, and Del Harmon's been dead 20 years and nobody remembers him, and nobody remembers the year the whole town hated a rancher named Ward for saying who could sleep under his own roof. I kept the ranch. Drought years and fat years both, I kept it. I never remarried. Folks thought that was sad, and I let them think it, because the truth was too big and too strange to hand across a fence to people who'd only want the small, sad version. The truth is I wasn't alone. I had two women's voices in me and a boy's laugh, and a song I could take out and play any evening I wanted the company. I did want it most evenings. I'd sit on that porch where we sat the last night, and I'd play the water song into the dark. And I never once got through it without hearing the space in it, the second voice-shaped space, the one she left me the very first night and every night after. And I'd like to think that somewhere north of the rim, some evenings, an old woman with silver in her black hair heard a space in her own song and knew who it was for. Cha came back once. Grown, a man of near 30 with hard years on him and a family of his own and my old knife on his belt, worn but kept. He didn't stay long. It wasn't safe for him to stay long even then, even that late. Some things this country never did learn, but he sat at my fire one night the way he had as a boy, and he told me his aunt had lived to be old and had gone easy in her sleep in the country she'd rebuilt, and that near the end she'd sung less, but she'd never stopped, not once, not through any hard day, right up till the last one. And he told me the last thing she ever said about me, which he'd carried all that way to give me, the way I'd once given him a safe white man to carry. She said, tell him I left the space open. I'm 81 years old, and I still play into that space every evening the weather lets me sit out. My hands shake worse than they did that first cracked night. One reed's gone for good, and I play around it. But I play. Every hard day and every easy one I play, because she taught me the difference between surviving a life and living one, and the difference is a sound you make even when, especially when, there's no earthly reason left to make it.